I filed for divorce during the time when my wife was still in the hospital after a car accident. Before our marriage, she already had 2 children. Their biological father is actively involved in their lives and takes part in raising them. Later, she and I had 2 more children together. The problem is that my wife is an extremely bad driver, but she stubbornly refuses to admit it. Over the course of our marriage, she was involved in multiple accidents. At one point, her driver's license was even temporarily revoked, not because of alcohol or drugs, but solely due to her consistently dangerous driving behavior. She is capable of reaching into the back seat while the car is moving to deal with a child instead of pulling over, stopping the car, or asking me or the older kids to help. One of the most telling incidents happened last August. She was stopped at a red light and took her foot off the brake to pick up our son's pacifier after it fell. The car was not put into park. As a result, another vehicle hit her car from the side. By sheer luck, she was the only one seriously injured, even though all 4 children were in the car. After that moment, I realized I could no longer tolerate this. I told her directly that she was free to put herself and her older children in danger if she chose to. But if I was in the car, or if our shared children were in the car, she was required to keep her eyes on the road, her hands on the steering wheel, and not get distracted by anything else. When she was eventually allowed to drive again, I reminded her of this condition. I told her that I loved her, that her older children mattered to me and were dear to me, and that I cared about them. But at the same time, I clearly set a boundary. If she ever engaged in dangerous behavior behind the wheel again, our marriage would be over, and I would do everything in my power during the divorce to ensure that she was legally prohibited from transporting my children in a car. She started crying and said that she never did these things intentionally. I asked her how it was possible to, accidentally, take off her seatbelt, remove her foot from the brake, let go of the steering wheel, and turn around to pick up a pacifier. She said that I was treating her like a complete idiot. I don't see it that way. I just want my children to stay alive and unharmed. For the record, I tried to do everything I could to minimize the risks. I drove as much as possible myself. I completely stopped drinking alcohol whenever we went out. I sold the car that I truly loved and bought a larger, safer vehicle so that there would be enough space for everyone. I even offered to pay for Uber or taxis if I wasn't around, and she didn't want to ride with me. But she liked driving and didn't want to give it up. Her ex-husband and her parents supported my position. Her ex said outright that if she ever endangered his children again, he would either seek full custody or demand a court order prohibiting her from driving them anywhere. Her parents, in turn, threatened to stop helping her pay for her absurdly expensive car insurance. She believed that all of us were being unfair, because she loved her children and would never intentionally harm them. According to her, the problem was simply that when one of the kids needed something, she lost focus and didn't think about asking for help. Before moving on to the comments under this story, I want to add something from my own perspective. I sometimes get distracted while driving too. That's exactly why I don't consider myself a perfect driver and am even somewhat afraid of driving, especially if I haven't driven for a long time. So the confidence of the woman in this story honestly amazes me. In my opinion, the very least she should have done was acknowledge that there was a problem. And acknowledgement is the first step toward change. Given the number of accidents, seeing a psychologist would have made perfect sense. The comments were mixed. One commenter focused on the phrase, "I don't care how she drives her own kids." They said that if you truly care about someone, you can't say something like that. Others, on the contrary, argued that the author never should have given her any chances at all and should have immediately banned her from driving with children entirely. There were also harsher opinions stating that excuses like, "I didn't mean to," are completely worthless. The author replied that on the day of the accident, he contacted her ex-husband directly from the hospital so that he could come and handle the situation with his children. He made sure all the kids were safe and immediately stated that she was no longer allowed to drive his children anywhere. The ex-husband fully supported him. First update *. While my wife was still in the hospital, it became clear that the accident that led to her hospitalization involved no other vehicles. She was alone in the car. According to the preliminary police findings, the cause was a loss of control of the vehicle. The car left the roadway and crashed, resulting in serious bodily injuries. Her injuries were severe. This wasn't just bruises or a concussion. Doctors spoke of fractures, internal injuries, and a long recovery period. Several times I was told outright that she was lucky to be alive. Those words kept echoing in my head, especially considering that in previous accidents, the children were almost always in the car with her. I visited her in the hospital. The atmosphere was heavy and tense. We tried to talk calmly, but the conversation kept returning to the same topic: her driving behavior. I reminded her that I had repeatedly asked her to be more attentive, to pull over if something distracted her, and not to try to deal with issues involving the kids while the car was moving. I also reminded her that I had warned her about the consequences if nothing changed. In response, she repeated the same thing she always had: that it was an accident, that she didn't do anything intentionally, that anyone could make a mistake. At the same time, any attempt to talk about responsibility, possible restrictions, or the need to seek help triggered a sharp emotional reaction from her. She saw it as an attack and an insult rather than concern for safety. After several conversations like this, I realized we were going in circles. She refused to acknowledge that the problem was systemic. To her, every crash was just an isolated, unlucky incident, not part of a larger pattern. And it was at that point that it finally hit me that I could no longer rely on hope that things would somehow turn out fine this time. I left the hospital and contacted a lawyer that same week. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life. I explained the situation, listed all the accidents, described her driving behavior, and pointed out the times when children had been in the car. We began the divorce process and simultaneously started preparing documents to seek full custody of our shared children. I insisted that in the future she be allowed only supervised visits with the children, with no ability to transport them herself. I wasn't trying to punish her or get revenge. My sole goal was to prevent a situation where another moment of inattention could cost someone their life. It was incredibly difficult to take these steps while she was lying in a hospital bed, in pain, and undergoing treatment. Part of me constantly questioned whether this was too harsh. But every time I hesitated, I remembered the previous accidents, the children in the back seat, and how easily everything could have ended in tragedy long before. In the end, I concluded that waiting any longer was no longer an option. I was not willing to risk the possibility that next time, one of our children would be in the car. For me, safety had definitively become more important than the fear of appearing cruel or heartless. Some time after the events described in the first update, new details emerged about yet another accident that completely erased any remaining doubts I had. As it turned out, that day she had stopped near a shopping center to retrieve documents she had left on the back seat. Technically, the car was parked, but she did not put the transmission into park or make sure the vehicle was fully secured. When she leaned back to grab the papers, the car suddenly started moving. In a panic, she pressed the accelerator instead of stopping the vehicle. As a result, the car lurched forward and drove into a canal located next to the shopping center. Purely by chance, no one else was injured. When I learned all the details, I was overwhelmed by a sense of complete helplessness. This no longer looked like a single mistake or a coincidence. The same scenario kept repeating itself, any minor distraction, and she immediately lost control of the situation. And each time, the consequences could have been fatal. That was when I first seriously considered that the issue might not just be carelessness, but something deeper. I began reading about attention disorders, particularly ADHD. Many of the descriptions strangely matched what I had observed for years: impulsivity, difficulty maintaining focus, and sudden decisions without considering the consequences. I tried to discuss this with her. I didn't diagnose her or accuse her of anything. I simply suggested seeing a specialist, getting evaluated, and figuring out the underlying cause. But every such conversation once again ended in conflict. She perceived it as an attempt to label her as defective or dangerous to her own children. After this accident, Both her ex-husband and I independently came to the same conclusion: we could no longer take this risk. Each of us filed for full custody of our respective children. In my case, part of the court decision was a direct prohibition against her transporting our shared children in a vehicle under any circumstances. The divorce was extremely difficult. Despite everything, I still had feelings for her. But love was no longer a sufficient reason to ignore a very real danger. I realized that if the worst were to happen, I would never forgive myself for having done nothing when I still had the chance. After the legal proceedings were over, she got a dog. At the insurance company's insistence, a dashcam was installed in her car. It was that camera that recorded the final accident. On the footage, you can see and hear the dog becoming sick in the back seat. She turned around to look at what was happening, took her eyes off the road for just a second, and that was enough. The car crossed into oncoming traffic, where it collided with a truck. This time, there were no second chances. My children lost their mother. Her older children lost their mother. Her parents lost their daughter. And I lost a woman who, despite all our conflicts, was still important and close to me. I am writing this in immense pain. I am not looking for sympathy, and I am not trying to shift blame. I simply wanted to give closure to this story for those who followed it from the very beginning. Most likely, I will not return to this account or answer any questions.